It's my pleasure to introduce Andi Arnovitz, who was born in Kansas City in the United States and now lives and works in Jerusalem. A conceptual artist, she uses etching, digital information, and various printmaking processes, as well as fabric and thread, to create both print series, artist books, and large-scale installations. These pieces explore various tensions that exist within religion, gender, and politics. Andi has exhibited her work in England, China, the United States, Israel, Spain, Poland, Finland, France, Lithuania, Canada, Italy, Mallorca, and Bulgaria. So it's an impressive list which keeps growing, I see. She has had many one-woman shows and participated in multiple group shows, and her works are in many private and public collections in the United States and in Europe. And I'll just mention a few of them: the U.S. Library of Congress, the Israel National Library, the Museum of Art in Ein Harod, the Islamic Museum, I'm assuming that's in Jerusalem, and Yeshiva University Museum, which is in New York. It is my pleasure to invite Andi Arnovitz to give us her presentation. Andi.
So first of all, I'm apologizing for speaking in English, but I have 20 minutes, not 20 years, and it would be very painful for all of you. I need to preface my talk with saying that I came to Judaism, to being religious, and to being an Israeli as an adult. They were both sort of pragmatic, philosophical decisions. And what happens when you make decisions to be Israeli and religious as an adult is every time there's a flaw or you see that something's broken in the system, you take it quite personally. So I have a deep belief in the structure of Judaism and also the belief that halakha is organic. I think the fact that we're all still here is probably the best testimony of all that halakha is organic. And I love to reflect on the fact that for me, the best example of the most outrageous, outside of the box, creative rabbinic thinking is when the Second Temple was destroyed and the rabbis came up with a completely new system of worship. So nobody can say to me that there's no precedent for being outrageously creative and thinking outside of the box. I also want to submit that Judaism, until recently, I think that the rabbis were highly sensitive to the plight of the individual, that they went out of their way to devise halakhic rulings and exceptions to protect people rather than harm them. And I really think for the first time, maybe there's examples in history, but these problems seem to be mounting today rather than being solved. And I believe we're on the threshold of a crisis, and the good part about having a crisis is that there's usually a resolution afterwards. So what you're going to see in my art is me exploring some of these places of conflict and crisis. And I'm apologizing to everybody because just a tiny part of this is about mamzrim. I have a bone to pick with many places and many problems in the Rabbanut today. So let's start with the Blacklist. Okay, in 2015, there were 5,305 Israelis on this list. Today, in 2017, 2 years later, there are 6,787 Israelis on the Rabbanut's blacklist. Now, mamzrim are just a tiny part of that blacklist, and they're on this list because there are questions regarding their status as Jews. Questions of conversion, questions regarding Kohanim, questions of mamzerim, and all these 6,787 Israelis are not allowed to be married according to the Rabbanut. So this number is steadily increasing. And while I'm no scholar in these matters, the fact that the number is growing rather than shrinking to me suggests a kind of rigidity on the part of the Rabbanut. It almost feels like there's a witch hunt going on. This is another version of this piece. This was installed in Beit Omanim this summer. And they're two completely different ones. This one, each individual is visible. This one, the entire group is more suggested as a korban, as a sacrifice. And for me, this is hugely problematic that these individuals have no recourse right now. And that the problem, more importantly, that the problem is growing. It's not shrinking. Now I'm going to jump now to another issue that I have a huge problem with, which is Aguenote. Now, I just need to explain to you what this series is. These are called the Coats of the Aguenote. So I got permission from the Jewish National Library here to reproduce digitally their antique ketubah collection. I took those ketubot, and as a metaphor for the state of these women's marriages, I tore them to shreds. I then sewed every individual piece of those scraps of ketubot, and I reassembled them into these coats. But I sewed the sleeves and the bottom of the coats shut. So she's trapped by this document. And I deliberately made it out of paper because it's paper, her ketubah, that traps her, and it's paper, her get, that she needs to release her from this state. And I left all of the strings hanging because she's hanging. Her whole life is hanging. She's dependent completely on other people. Now, this number is also growing in Israel, the number of women that are agunot. And 19% of the women in Israel that are in the process of getting divorced are denied a get. I think that's a huge number. So that translates to somewhere around 3,000 women. The entire problem of agunot began in the instance of women whose husbands had disappeared. And somehow we've allowed this to morph into a situation where it's almost unrecognizable, where husbands refuse to give their wives gets. So rather than recognizing and understanding that the entire issue has changed and become something else, and the rabbis having courage to deal with this in a new and creative way, we're locked into a system whereby we have all these women that are completely trapped. This next piece is called Lashon Hara. And this was a response that I had because anybody who reads any of the newspapers today, it's very clear that the rabbis, many of them, not all of them, thankfully, in fact, it's a fringe, really, but there's incredible inflammatory language going on. And when I read articles in which rabbis suggest that certain individuals were murdered because of the lack of observance of the population, or that terrible things happened because God decided something, as if they know exactly what God is thinking, I find this incredibly unhelpful and also rather unrabbinic. So as a response to this, I created this piece, and I'm really suggesting here that we've lost our way. The rabbis have lost their way, and instead of uniting us, they're dividing us. So this piece called A Delicate Balance, this was presented at the Jerusalem Biennale of Jewish Art 2 years ago. And it was a piece that I did also at Mishkanot L'Omanut at Ein Harod for the Matronita show. It's called A Delicate Balance because you had to walk through this piece in order to go from one gallery space to the next. Hanging on each iron rod are 2 clay scrolls. And if you pay attention, you'll see that on one side the scroll is a text from the Gemara, some kind of a halachic source that informs a public opinion or rabbinic law. And the other side is an article from the newspaper. So, for example, on one side would be the laws of Pidyon Shvuim, and the other side would be an article about Gilad Shalit. And on one side would be a page from the Gemara dealing with the laws of rape, and the other side would be an article about the Katsav indictment. And one side would be an article about the laws of bribery, and the other would be an article about the Olmert scandal. The laws of tzedakah, the number of Israeli children living below the poverty line. So every one of these was some kind of a flashpoint in modern Israeli life, and we all had to navigate through this thing without breaking something, which for me is a huge metaphor for what the modern state of Israel is today, which is this amazing country where we're trying to live informed by Jewish law, and at the same time, we have to go forward. And so for most of us, we don't really want to break halakha, but sometimes halakha breaks the individuals. And so people, they actually got broken. And then there was the whole instance of having to reflect on having shattered something. And finally, this is just a sample of what they looked like. This is a piece called 4% of Us. And one of the things I also am interested in is something called akarat hilchatit, which is halachic infertility. And a lot of people don't know what this is. But this is an instance where a woman ovulates right after she has her period. And so if she waits 7 days to go to the mikveh, she never, ever conceives. So believe it or not, this is a kind of a big problem. And Dr. Danny Rosnack, who is an obstetrician and a gynecologist here in Jerusalem, calculated based on the number of women that he's seen in his practice with this problem that we've lost 4% of the Jewish people over the millennia. So this is really a piece that deals with the inflexibility of the rabbis. Now, thankfully today, there are a lot of contemporary rabbis behind closed doors who are counseling couples and saying, don't wait, pru or vu trumps everything, go and get pregnant. But there are also lots of rabbis who are saying, no, 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 we don't touch halakha, we have modern medicine, take hormones, alter your cycle so you can get pregnant when we say you should get pregnant. So you're taking a perfectly healthy woman who could get pregnant on her own, pumping her with hormones, which all of us know have all kinds of terrible side effects, so that basically she can get pregnant when the rabbis say she should. And I think that this is another instance where halakha is lagging way behind. And I think there's a huge insensitivity. This last series I'm going to show you, this is a series of etchings that are called questionable motives. And another area that I'm very alarmed within the Rabbanut, and it is, again, very specific singular voices of rabbis, but these are the new chumras about the laws of modesty for little girls. Now, I actually have a lot of concerns because I think secular world is putting on little girls all kinds of other pressures. Anybody who's been recently to a bat mitzvah party and sees 12-year-old little girls in platform shoes and makeup and dangling earrings and long fingernails and backless dresses knows that someone is buying these things for her and that somehow we're suggesting that this is what women look like. Now, on the other side, in the religious world, not just the Jewish world, the Muslim world as well, there is these incredible laws that keep getting to lower and lower ages of little girls about modesty. My favorite one is the rabbi here in Jerusalem ruled that little girls that are 5 years and older are not allowed to ride bicycles because it's just too sexually suggestive. And so my question then is, so a 6-year-old is a turn-on a bike. There's also another ruling that says that men are not allowed to swim with 3-year-olds that are not their, little girls that are older than 3 that are not their daughters. So I'm thinking, okay, a 4-year-old, like this is some kind of dangerous sexual territory. So this is another area that I think that the Rabbanut needs to think harder and be more sensitive and open up. So these pieces that I showed you, they're not specifically only about mamzerim, because I've only done the Blacklist, really. But these are just an example of how I hope that art, in this instance, it's like a picture is worth 1,000 words, that art can suddenly bring to the forefront and make people aware that there is a huge problem, that we can create an image as artists that is haunting, that makes you chew on something. And that's the beginning of the process of change. Because the more people that see these pieces of art that deal with these issues, the more people know about them. The more that people know about them, the more we have the potential for change. Thank you.